It's now my pleasure to introduce the Honourable Erin O'Toole. We're going to be opening up with some remarks from Mr. O'Toole and then moving into a Q&A. As you know, the Honourable Erin O'Toole is the leader of the Conservative Party, and it is now my pleasure to welcome Mr. O'Toole to CFA's AGM to speak to our delegation. I'll now ask you to begin.
Thank you very much for having me, Mary. C'est un honneur pour moi d'être ici avec
It's an honor to be here with you.
From Ottawa, and I'm pleased to be joined by two of my Conservative colleagues, our Member of Parliament, Leanne Rood, who's our Shadow Minister for Agriculture and Agri-Food, and Tracy Gray, the MP, who is our Shadow Minister for Export Promotion and International Trade, of course, ag being at the centre of Canada's trade strategy. I'd also like to acknowledge Canada's Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, who's with us today, as well as the leader of the Bloc Québécois and his party's agricultural critic, and the NDP. We all think Canadian ag is critical to Canada, and I think the Conservative Party knows that probably best than any. Not only do farmers feed cities, but you're the driver of our food security, our trade strategy, and you create a stronger economy at the local level and nationally. And as we speak, Canada's at a crossroads. Farming families, all Canadians, have been experiencing challenges in this pandemic. And there's two paths before us right now that could not be more different. One path veers off into the unknown with prolonged, risky shutdowns and stark changes to our economy that will leave hundreds of thousands of Canadian workers behind, and the families, farming families and communities that depend on them. That's the path of Mr. Trudeau's reimagined economy, in his words, after COVID-19. One where an Ottawa knows best approach picks and chooses which sectors and which jobs they think Canadians should have and which they should help grow. The other path is steady and balanced. It will deliver us a Canada where farming and agriculture remain supported and respected, where wages go up, where there's certainty, and where the dreams of many families in Canada that have not been able to afford a better life in the last year can actually be realized as we recover from COVID-19. That is the Conservative path that we're presenting to Canadians. Farmers and farming families have stepped up in massive ways throughout this pandemic, and the Conservative Party would like to thank you. And it's time, after many years, for a government that will have your back. Conservative Party will champion your needs at the negotiating tables and will stand up to predatory trade practices wherever they're found. I'll remind you, it was the Conservatives who have negotiated 98% of our trade access as a country. Personally, I went to South Korea during the Conservative government to help open up access in that Asian market for beef, pork, grain, and oilseeds. To get our country back on track, we need to become clear-eyed trade realists. We need to stand up for Canadian agriculture and an international rules-based systems. Great opportunities await with the realignment of global trade, and Canada needs to help lead that realignment. This is especially true in the growing and strategically important Indo-Pacific. We must be forward-looking and establish new supply chains, new markets with developing countries like India that share our commitment to democracy. We must repair the frayed relationship with India that has developed under the Trudeau Liberals. In fact, after that well-known state visit went so poorly, there was a tariff applied on lentils, another sector where Canada is a leader. We must stand up for these sectors and support growth in growing markets. We must also open our eyes to opportunities in developed economies and fix some of the non-tariff barriers that have been popping up in the last few years in Europe and in Asia. Canadian agricultural commodities are the best in the world, and as more of the world experiences prosperity, they will continue to demand the quality and high standards for which Canadian farming families are known. But to make sure we access and have a rules-based system, we require strong leadership at home. The next election, whenever it comes, will be about who can secure a strong economic future for all Canadians following COVID-19. I wish the government had not let us down on vaccines, but they did. I'm worried the same will happen with the economic recovery. Canadians cannot afford for us to be in 53rd place in economic growth, in job creation, just like we are in the vaccine deployment. Conservatives will be working tirelessly to champion Canadian workers, farming families, and their communities. And every day, I'm sharing our vision for a stronger, more prosperous, and a more united Canada. I was proud to be a parliamentary secretary and a minister in a Conservative government who understood agriculture and stood up for the millions of families across this great country who depend on it. Now I have the honor of leading the Conservative Party, and I want you to know that Canada can be a world leader again in agriculture. We can open up new markets, we can secure better trade access, and we can have a smart, driven, and ethical government again in Ottawa. So thank you very much for having me. Mary, I'm looking forward to taking some questions from your members, and I wish all of the families on this call the best of health and success for the year.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Toole. We do have a chat function, and there are instructions on how to ask the questions via chat. And we will have our CFA staff, Matt Houston, he will be reading the questions out to us. And there, the instructions are on the screen. So as you can see, click the blue button with the hand icon at the top right of your screen. And then from there, the rest of the instructions are on your screen. And Matt, I will ask you, do we have a first question?
Our first question is from Chris Vandenheuvel, and there's a small statement and 2 questions. So, Mr. O'Toole, as the potential next Prime Minister of Canada, you'll have a lot of numbers thrown your way, and I'd like to give you a few. 2.3 million is the number of Canadians that our sector employs, the largest private sector employer in the country, arguably the only sector that truly goes from coast to coast to coast. 145 billion Ag's GDP contribution to the Canadian economy, making it in the top 3 of the sector in Canada, and we have so much potential to do more. In today's world, healthcare, of course, has to be the #1 priority, but food security as Canadian agriculture has to be considered #2. So I have 2 questions. As party leader, will you commit today that if elected Prime Minister, to making Canadian agriculture a priority by investing in increases not only in business risk management program, but to the agriculture budget as a whole, and mandating government apply an agriculture lens to all policy decisions across all departments?
Well, thank you for the question, Chris. And certainly myself and our caucus know full well those numbers. The 2.3 million you talk about are farming families from coast to coast to coast. You're right. It's a part of our economy that touches every part of this country. And increasingly, there's been risks and uncertainties. I meet with so many farming families who have to rely on off-farm income to make sure that they can provide certainty and opportunity for their kids. So that well-being of those families is at the core of everything we do. We have farmers in our caucus. My shadow minister, Leanne, grew up in agriculture, worked in it as an adult, and lives on a working farm now. We represent farming families, and so they have always been, Chris, at the core of everything we do. In terms of risk management programs, agri-stability, and others, we want to make sure they meet the modern needs. We're committed to working with the provinces to modernize, making sure that these programs are bankable. As I said, we are going to be relentless in opening up new markets and repairing trade markets. I'm sad to say, under the Trudeau government, we've seen not just the tariff situation I talked about with India. Durum wheat was tariffed by Italy. We've seen disruption and bad deals with the United States. We've seen uncertainty in terms of opening up new markets. We will push for that, because in this rebalancing of global trade, there will be challenges with respect to China. Mr. Trudeau is very much out of step when it comes to our closest allies and a united position with respect to Chinese trade practices. So we're going to have to support food security here at home. I've been talking about this for several years, Chris. So I look forward to being a prime minister that reminds Canadians in our urban cores how important agriculture is for our food security, but also for our economic security as well.
Okay, the question from
Matt, there's a second part to Chris's question as well.
sorry, both parts of the question were asked and answered. by
Okay,
Mr.
super. Thank you.
The next question is from Bill Piotti from the Nova Scotia Federation of Agriculture. As chair of our Provincial Business Risk Management Committee, it has become very clear that the agri-stability program fails to meet the needs of all farmers nationwide, particularly here in the Maritimes. I've learned that the agri-stability program has been diluted under the control of previous Conservative administration. What would you do differently to improve this system? Are you committed to this action, and what would it look like?
Well, thanks, Bill. As I said in my previous answer to Chris, yes, we are committed to modernizing and making sure that the risk management programs meet the needs of farming families today. As you know, there's a provincial component that will require us to work closely with the provinces. And here's another area where we are going to try and build partnerships with the provinces, not always an Ottawa knows best approach. I lived in Nova Scotia during my time in the Canadian Armed Forces. I've toured and been part of ag discussions impacting the province, from blueberries to Christmas trees to supply managed sectors. As I said, our party at its core values rural communities and farming families. And I'll tell you, as I said, 98% of our market access has been negotiated by Conservatives. We've been able to stand up in our negotiations and get good outcomes. And the risk management piece will be part of it. We need them to be bankable and meet the modern needs. And that will be something I'm committed to in my first year in government. We have to work with the provinces to get it right.
Our next question is from Don McKay. Asks, what role will agriculture experience a Conservative climate change policy platform to realize our potential?
Well, as you know, and Mary, I'm sure your members talk about this a lot, I've been talking about for years the fact that seeding and soil practices of Canadian agriculture writ large are huge to offsetting, storing, and sequestering carbon. So I've been in favor of many years for a net approach to carbon emissions. We will have emissions in all sectors of our economy, some higher amounts, some are large emitters, but we have to recognize what is happening now. The good practices that capture and sequester carbon, and ag being a huge part of that. In fact, I was talking to an industry leader who right now in a non-ag sector is looking at partnering nationally on a program to help farming families sequester even more through technology and new practices. That is the way we are preparing a climate change program, one that will respect the provinces, which actually have jurisdiction here over resources and shared jurisdiction over the environment. In fact, many provinces for the last decade have either had carbon taxes or cap and trade or large emitter approaches. What Mr. Trudeau has done has actually been unconstitutional in my view, and it's been punitive on farming families, from the carbon tax, which he's now going to triple, through to the clean fuel standard. The totality of this is punishing farmers, and I hear it from farmers in my own community with the carbon tax on their drying operations and on their farm operations. And nothing shows the shallowness of the current government when it comes to ag. Just yesterday, the Liberals voted against a bill, C-206, brought forward by one of my colleagues, Phil Lawrence, to remove farming families from the carbon tax. If they truly did appreciate what you do, they could have voted for that bill. Instead, they did not. So we're committed, and I really think we need to educate Canadians on the stewardship that farming families are already showing when it comes to emission reduction and a net approach to Canada's emissions.
Our next question is from Spire Couturier of the Canadian Aquaculture Industry Alliance. Seafood farmers represent the largest agri-food export in British Columbia, yet the Liberal Party has opted to cut 1,500 farming families and workers from First Nations and rural Canada. Would you commit to growing this sector of agri-food in Canada if elected Prime Minister?
You cut out at the first part. I couldn't hear other than BC. Are you talking aquaculture?
Yeah, sorry. The first part of the question was, seafood farmers represent the largest agri-food exports in British Columbia. The Liberal Party has opted to cut 1,500 farming families and workers from First Nations and rural Canada. Would you commit to growing this sector of agri-foods in Canada if elected Prime Minister?
Yes. In fact, we think some of the innovation that's been shown, particularly in British Columbia, but also in Atlantic Canada and other parts of the country, really are cutting edge. And here is my basic equation. You heard the setup I talked about, Mr. Trudeau, reimagining the economy. This isn't a time to reimagine or to be late in our economic recovery. People are worried. We've spent more per capita in this crisis than any other G7 country, and we've had the worst outcomes in terms of employment and economic growth. If we don't get the vaccines deployed, start reopening and making sure every sector of the economy moves forward in all regions, in all sectors, including all ag sectors, we are going to doom our children to the massive debt that Mr. Trudeau has accumulated and less opportunity. I speak to many kids in graduating college and university in my own riding in the Durham region in Ontario. Lots of student debt and few opportunities. My kids, 14 and 9, I don't want us saddling them with $500 billion worth of debt that Mr. Trudeau has accumulated and less opportunity for them to work and have the same opportunities all of us have had. So this risky ideological approach to the economy post-COVID will actually hurt Canada. And I can't say it starkly enough. We are going to get behind and support every sector of our economy to recover, because at the core of it are jobs for mom or dad, whether in BC in this case, or in Ontario, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Atlantic Canada. We need all families to do well so that communities can be strong. And it's time that we have a Prime Minister that actually has real experience in job creation in the private sector. We can't afford to be late and 2 steps behind like we have been at every stage in this last year.
Our next question is from Bill Campbell from Keystone Agricultural Producers. He asks, with enhanced exports expected, how can you ensure that transportation infrastructure be able to meet expectations? Will your government ensure producers' rights be protected through the Canadian Grain Act review?
Well, thanks, Bill. This is something that's critical and something I think I can highlight the fact that the previous Conservative government did very well. After the global economic downturn of 2008, 2009, the infrastructure program we rolled out was the fastest, most effective, and thankfully scandal-free, something this government doesn't seem to be able to do, deployment of infrastructure resources. And I'll tell you where we need to make sure a priority is set: export market access. So the Pacific Gateway Initiative in Vancouver, in the Port of Vancouver, was a Conservative initiative to make sure we could take advantage of new markets in Asia, to make sure the backlog of grain that we saw several years, the backlog in the rail system, so that the port facilities was not adding to that. Key rail investments, key infrastructures like ports and other logistics support is critical. And this is what the difference is. They may not be fancy and green and happy for a press conference or a photo op. But having worked in the private sector, I know how important it is to have a secure and reliable logistics system so that you can get your products to market. Commodities, ag products. So this will be a core part of our infrastructure approach, getting the money out quickly and giving priority to investments that will help all of our exporters, including ag, get their products to market.
The next question is from Marcel Groslo of BA. He asks, there is a proposal to improve agri-stability that was discussed during the last FP agricultural meeting. The prairie provinces do not support the proposal. Can you help us on this file?
Well, as I said, you've highlighted what I've said now twice, Mark. The agri-stability, the risk management approach needs to be a federal and provincial approach. And I'm willing to put it as a priority so that we can provide some certainty here for families. And I'm the type of leader, and this is my experience from the military, 10 years in the private sector, as a minister that turned around a department that was in crisis. I build teams, I help us set priorities, and we drive to get things done. And this will be a priority, as I said in my first year, to work with the provinces and CFA and other ag stakeholders to get a deal done. Why are we behind most of the developed world on vaccines? Because right now we have a government that doesn't get anything done. Consults, meanders, we need leadership. And so coming out of COVID-19, as I said previously, I want to see all parts of our economy, every cylinder in our economic engine needs to be firing. And ag is an important part of that. So in terms of risk management, yes, that'll be a priority in our first year. In terms of market access, in terms of the trade deals, better outcomes, getting rid of some of the tariffs that some countries have imposed under the Trudeau government's poor foreign policy approach. And as I said, that infrastructure piece, we need to fix it now to access global markets. We have the best products in the world, bar none. We need to be proud of what we do here in Canada and get it out there to help families at the local level.
The next question is from Joseph from OGVG. Mr. O'Toole, I would suggest to you that our worker programs are essential and grow more important each retirement of a Canadian in the agriculture sector. The preservation and strengthening of these are paramount. I am sure you will agree. Are you prepared to come together with CFA and other allied parties to create an appropriate go-forward agricultural workforce strategy that addresses this incredibly important sector? Yes.
I'll elaborate, Joseph. Just this week, I had roundtables with the Windsor-Essex Chamber of Commerce and with mayors in that region, particularly Southwest Ontario. The labor shortage and some of the seasonal temporary foreign workers have been a crisis within this pandemic. They are vital. I was speaking en français au Québec sur les abattoirs locaux.
He's talking about local slaughterhouses. There are problems throughout the country with workers.
Challenges within ag, and we have to recognize that and make sure that we can have safe, effective seasonal worker programs, temporary foreign worker programs, and conduct them within the context of public safety. That's why the failure of the Trudeau government on a national program of rapid testing at borders, at airports, within the TFW program was a massive failure. I've been pushing on this since literally my first week as minister. Other countries that have used rapid tests, particularly in between the waves of this pandemic, have been able to help sectors function. Some large employers like OPG and others, Ontario Power Generation, for those outside Ontario, have had great success, but we need a national program to provide certainty for this sector. And I'll tell you, Joseph, my own community, we have a long and historic ag community, and I know for many of the orchards and farms in my riding in Durham, Ontario, we now have 2 generations of seasonal workers coming from either Mexico or Jamaica. Some of our farming families have traveled south to attend weddings. I've raised the importance of this issue when I was in Mexico, meeting with parliamentarians there. It is good for those countries. It is critical for ag. And so I hope you get a sense that with me as Prime Minister, there will be an urgency and a strategy and prioritization of these issues, not just reading a press release and letting problems accumulate. We need a get things done government, and that's what you'll have with me.
The next question is from Pierre Lampron of the Dairy Farmers of Canada. You mentioned the expansion of international trade, but did not mention the supply managed sectors that were sacrificed in recent trade agreements. You've committed in the past to protecting supply management. I would like to know your position on this issue.
Merci, Pierre. Comme vous le savez,
Thank you, Pierre. As you know, I support supply management, and
the Conservatives have a long track record of support for supply management, and we've been pushing, and some of our pressure last fall has led the Liberals to finally move forward on some of the compensation. I've said that I'll move on this in my first year as Prime Minister as well, because the compensation related to CETA, European deal, and TPP was something that we tried to do. I was involved in those deals. We wanted to make sure we had access grown for the non-supply managed sectors and work with the supply managed sectors on a way to provide modernization and innovation for processing, but also provide certainty and compensation at the farm level. We're committed to that. Canada, as a government, needs to stand up and respect the deals we've made. We will do that. I think our track record shows that, Pierre, and I'm very proud that our caucus has and will have people in it that are part of the farming community, including supply managed farming.
The next question is from Andy Ivanhoven, Canadian Ornamental and Horticulture Alliance. The ornamental farming, plants, trees, flowers are good food for the soul, reducing stress and creating great environments. Will your government support our request for 2022 to be designated the Year of the Garden?
I love that concept. I'll be honest with you. It's the first I've heard of that proposal. Please send me more. My shadow minister, Leanne Rood, and I were talking in the middle of the crisis on some of the acute needs when certain provinces closed open markets and other things that was hitting the ornamental and horticulture sectors. My area of the Durham region, huge horticulture center of excellence, particularly for trees, ornamental bushes, all the things as subdivisions have been built in Ontario. A lot of the trees for the streets come from my riding, and I'm very proud of that. So providing that showcasing of that with a year and a designation and participating in public education events, I think that's a great idea. I've talked a lot to the apple growers and others about the Pack of Trust and how we can try and come up with certainty for farming families in the fresh produce and fruits, given the U.S. and Canada markets being integrated. Charles Stevens, my friend from Durham, is always bringing that up whenever I see him in the riding. So I want you to know, and hopefully you get a sense that from the leader right through to our caucus, we not only understand ag, we respect it and know how important it is to our economy at a provincial level, but also at the national level. And any way we can highlight that by a year celebrating the garden or celebrating the eat local trend and some of the success we've had from that will be great. I'll also say this, both myself and Leanne Rood pushed in the House of Commons for some of the big grocery unfair supplier increases. We were hammering the Walmarts and the Loblaws for doing it, and I praise Sobeys for not following suit. Coming out of COVID, when there's been some areas doing well and other places struggling, we've all got to approach this in a way that's fair, particularly from a competition law standpoint. So once again, we're driving to represent the interests of farming families.
And I believe that is all the time we have left for questions on the floor.
Thank you, Mr. O'Toole. We appreciate you taking the time to have some dialogue with us today. It's obviously quite important to us to understand where the Conservative Party stands as far as making agriculture a priority and helping us realize the potential that we certainly saw Dominic Barton touting back in 2017. So thank you for your time and thanks for answering the questions.
Thank you,
Moving on to
Mary,
the
and
next-
best wishes of health to everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.